What is up guys, Deadset here. As those of you that follow the stream already know, I have been beta testing the Necromancer for a while now. This video will be the first in a series that provide impressions and feedback on the class, and we'll start off with the Inarius Set. Now, judging by its current set bonuses, which by the way have been mechanically uniform for 3 patches in a row, kind of indicative of a complete idea, I would say. The Inarius Set, the Grace of Inarius, is the Necromancer's take on melee spellcasting. First, I will go over the set bonuses for those of you that are not in the beta currently, so you have an idea of what I'm talking about. The 2-piece bonus grants the active component of bone armor a damage component, a damage increase more specifically. The 4-piece grants a stacking damage reduction per enemy affected in the activation radius. The 6-piece grants a circular damage effect, kind of reminiscent of Sweeping Wind, as you can see on the screen. For those of you that play Monk, you know what I'm talking about. Plus a strong damage multiplier against enemies in the damaging circle. Skill options aside, I do have a few general Inarius Set impressions and criticisms to share. First of all, the set pieces and the accompanying visuals, I would say, are pretty good. They execute the apparent design intent for an agnostic melee spellcaster or something of the sort quite well. However, as a skill agnostic set, Inarius was also best equipped to be the set to incorporate Sage's Desperate Farming set. However, due to the current set piece distribution, it seems that no Necromancer set will actually be able to include Sages in. Quite baffling, I would say, since all the other classes are able to. Inarius is the mildest in flavor up to its 4-piece bonus, which makes it likely the best candidate for the role. However, not only is the 2-piece bonus wasted on a very bland effects, but it's also presenting sort of a noob trap situation, I would say, that might lead players to believe that bone armor is actually a meaningful damage skill. Once you progress your character enough, it very much isn't. This effect can be easily replaced or supplemented by a utility bonus to a greater overall performance, I would say. Granting bone armor a power similar to Iron Skin Flash would be amazing, considering the Inarius Necro's melee mancing woes. Also, the stacking damage reduction depends on the number of enemies struck within the very narrow radius, initially especially when you start the rifts. If you encounter a smaller pack at the start of a GR, especially if it's a sufficiently high GR, you can't really ignore them, but you'll have to struggle with a lower initial stack as well, and kind of activate it and hope that it'll come off cooldown before the next time you encounter a big enough pack to get the 15th stack. And if you die on the Guardian, good luck with building the stacks up from scratch. Also, a very important issue, no innate crowd control reduction on a melee range set. The Necro as a whole does not have either crowd control immunity or a reliable crowd control breaker, which I'm not entirely opposed to it. This can bring crowd control reduction as a meaningful stat that you actually pay attention to, and it can lead you to consider items like Kreml's Buff Bracers on a class that doesn't really have defining options for the slot. The problem is when all the other 6 classes are in fact immune to crowd control. The problem is highlighted with the Inarius' melee range because you lose both character control, positioning, and damage potential on top of everything at the same time. Finally, it's something kind of strange, the legendary gems with on-hit mechanics like the Mirinae, Pain Enhancer, Even Bane of the Stricken, are they supposed to trigger off of the Bone Tornado? It's kind of inconsistent with other item-created effects in the game, because they currently do, and quite efficiently too. So, while Inarius can theoretically work with any damaging skill, provided that you can manually choose the casting location, the mechanics and the wording of the set bonus naturally nudge you towards skills that are used at or near the character location. This kind of leads you to combine Inarius with skills that either naturally operate at melee fighting range and also have synergistic legendary powers to build around. The first build path that I particularly focused on was with Death Nova, which particularly with the Bone Nova rune, I was able to get to comfortable Torment 13 farming. The Necro has 3 essence spending secondary skills. Bone Spear, which can be cast at melee range but is better suited to the dedicated Pestilence set and distance dependent passives like Serration. Skeletal Mages are better suited to the Rathma set, and they introduce, if used with Inarius, a unnecessary aiming component because you have to sort of summon while mousing over targets affected by the damaging circle in order to focus your pets on the damage susceptible targets. Quite annoying if you are just trying to farm or even push with the Inarius set in this manner. Death Nova, on the other hand, casts off of character location and seems naturally built for the Inarius set, naturally gravitating towards the Bone Nova rune since the poison runes will produce a weaker damage result, even when combined with the Black Death Scythe, which scales off of the number of poison skills on your bar. And although there is a Blood rune, the Inarius set is poorly equipped, I would say, to deal with the health costs. It's much better to use the Tragul set for those purposes, because it has that strong healing angle to it. This leaves you with Bone Nova, which, as I said, is able to speed farm T13 at a comfortable pace. And that's the place where the build sort of shines, because it's very similar, for those of you that play Wizard, to Explosive Blast builds. With that in mind, the Inarius Bone Nova builds do suffer from some unfortunate drawbacks. First of all, holding down the Death Nova button will lead to some very surprisingly fast bone armor depletions. Can catch you off guard very easily. This subsequently drops off your damage, and of course can lead to your untimely death, especially jarring during farming because you don't really expect to be threatened in content you comfortably out-damage. This is of course due to the Scythe of the Cycle, which is a legendary scythe that consumes your bone armor duration to grant you a damage bonus. You can ease that problem a little bit by stacking over 33% CDR and applying bone armor on cooldown, but I'm still leaning towards Scythe of the Cycle being too gluttonous at a 4-second consumption per secondary attack. This might be better at a lower second consumption. Also, Death Nova suffers from a distinct lack of desirable dedicated legendaries. The damage benefits you receive from the Blood Tide Blade, which is supposedly a dedicated legendary, is directly tied to the number of enemies you fight, resulting in a severe drop-off once the trash is cleared in any major battle, and a crippling, I would say, drop-off at the Rift Guardian, which is the last place you want to see your damage tank. This is the exact same outcome, I would say, as the Golden Flans for Crusaders, a density-dependent bonus that has been plaguing an otherwise fun build and has been complained about for years at this point. The other Death Nova legendary, the Briner's Journey Boots, has a very strange bonus. A chance to cast Bone Nova on Bone Spike cast location. It's kind of nonsensical when you think about it. It's attaching a low chance skill proc, which is otherwise made viable by a proximity based set, to a ranged attack. Compare these items, these two items, to the universal usefulness of Wand of Woe and Orb of Infinite Depth for the closest build equivalent. And you immediately recognize the lack of steady damage bonuses, dependable damage reduction, and main hand offhand synergy and adaptability in the build. Third, and I would say quite important as well, is the Death's Nova inability to be cast while moving, which makes it a vastly inferior skill when it comes to a farming build, and a huge annoyance during progression as well if you choose to push with it. Flavor of casting animations, sure, should be considered, but this type of player inconvenience will likely result in the exact same outcome as the wizard's Wave of Force, a neglected skill that's as close to forgotten as it gets. The second build path I focused on was generator builds. The Necro has 3 essence generating attacks, Bone Spikes, which is better suited to ranged combats due to the strongest rune Path of Bones, and the strongest passive Serration being based on distance, Siphon Blood, which I simply avoided due to the dissonance between currently existing legendary powers, and finally Grim Scythe, which was my choice for a primary attack build. I ignored the Dual Scythes rune, which theoretically is the strongest when it comes to base damage, and I also avoided the attack speed synergy of the Frost Scythe rune, all in favor of Cursed Scythe. This is because it's much better supported in terms of legendary items, allowing you to benefit from all 3 curses and Dainty's Binding for damage reduction without using up your skill bar, which is huge. It also grants you damage multiplication from Tragul's Corroded Fang, and Spreading Malediction as a passive as well. I've taken this build to the GR 80-ish range and firmly believe that it can easily be expanded upon into a great Inarius build path, with some tweaks, of course. Generator builds, I would say, suffer from some of the following problems. First of all, Ledger's Disdain. It's a very interesting phylactery, one of the few, as it allows you sort of an inverse Shenlong playstyle, sort of the a reverse monk in a way, as you strive to never remain at full essence by dumping your essence regularly. At the same time, it's restricted to Grim Scythe, which is a very harsh restriction that practically ensures that Siphon Blood and Bone Spikes will never be used for a generator build. Very unfortunate. I would rather see it cover all of the generators. There is a dedicated Siphon Blood legendary, the Funerary Pick, but it can't compete with Tragul's Corroded Fang because of the free Decrepify and its interaction with Dainty's Binding. Damage reduction is hard to come by for the Necro and often comes at the expense of mobility, which when you go for the Grim Scythe routes, you don't have to resort to because you get free curses, essentially. A large portion of the build, the generator build specifically, damage potential is hidden away in Simulacrum Reservoir, which is sitting at an imposing 120-second cooldown with a mere 15-second uptime. And while it's very tempting to invest into the Haunted Visions amulet, any non-Tragul set build is poorly equipped to do that, unfortunately, because it drains your health at a rate of 10% per second at best, which is an impossible sustain requirement on top of a huge CDR stacking already necessary for a Simulacrum uptime. I urge developers to strongly reconsider Simulacrum's cooldown and the accompanying item drawbacks relative to the power benefits provided and the poor AI you have to contend with. As a side note, this is also very hurtful to Tragul's blood spending builds because the supposed doubling of the DPS coming from the Simulacrum companion is crippled by the AI priority system because of instead of prioritizing proximity to the player to supersede the spender mimicry, it often lags behind and casts into thin air, basically accomplishing nothing for a very expensive cooldown. Also, dumping essence with frequency and effectiveness that is required for a Ledger's Disdain setup is only possible with Skeletal Mage Singularity. It would be good to have a second full essence dump at the Necro's disposal, similarly to how the Barbarian recently expanded on Ancient Spear Boulder Toss with Seismic Slime Rumble. The third build path I focused on was the Corpse Explosion builds, as you can see on the screen. This is my favorite, by the way. The Necro has 3 damage-related corpse consumption skills: Revive, which is better suited to the pet-oriented Rathma set; the Corpse Lance, which can work here, but I kinda saved it for the Pestilence set because it's tied to its mechanics; and of course Corpse Explosion, my prime choice for a corpse-related Inarius build. Now, considering the rune's superiority during Land of the Dead, as well as its range restrictions naturally falling in line with how the Inarius set operates, I find it very hard to consider alternative runes when close quarters is present. Its poisonous element is also lending itself to the Black Death setup with poisonous skills across your bar, whereas the physical and cold variations don't really have comparable synergies. The Blood rune is once again out of question for Inarius builds. In the current Land of the Dead Reliant setups, you'll simply be unable to sustain. You'll likely kill yourself as you're trying to play with it. I have taken a poison-based Corpse Explosion build to mid-80s with no augmentations and a very bare-bones character, and I firmly believe it can reach high 80s, low 90s with a complete endgame character in the current state that it is. With that in mind, I would say the build is facing some very serious issues that I would like to see addressed. First of all, and perhaps most importantly, is the over-reliance on Land of the Dead cooldown. The biggest power spike and primary consideration when you play a any corpse category build, I would say, is undoubtedly your Land of the Dead uptime. While I give this feedback in the context of the Inarius set, it also heavily impacts the Pestilence set and Tragul's to a point where I don't think it can be ignored really. Land of the Dead might have been designed as a brief period of awesomeness, right? It follows a lengthy period of complete ineptitude, I would say, which is very jarring. Your other methods of corpse generation are sporadic, meager, and inconvenient at best. Even if we ignore the stacking Corpse Explosion damage, the clash of the Grasp of Essence with the Moribund's Gauntlets, which occupy the same slot, necessitate Ring of Royal Grandeur and all that jazz, we're still relying on a pet's position, the golem I have here, for your entire damage output during Land of the Dead downtime. Thus, for high GR, pushing a Zodiac Ring and a full stack of CDR doesn't lead to the most seamless gameplay, but is still far more reliable and costs you less gear slots. You seem completely incapable of doing anything outside Land of the Dead. Very binary gameplay. As a direct result of the Land of the Dead ubiquity, you are either outputting maximum damage or you're not outputting any damage at all. It also happens to invalidate the current second version of the Johnstone because you don't care what happens outside Land of the Dead. You're simply trying to get back into it, plus the valuable jewelry slots that a Johnstone would be spent on has better candidates at this point. The opportunity for perma Land of the Dead seems to be in demand among other beta testers, but I honestly disagree with that because it just nullifies corpses as a resource and turns them into a fancy and pointless graphic if you have Land of the Dead up at all times. What the Necro needs more than that is a reliable source of corpse generation, and that or a readily available Land of the Dead that is more strategic than it currently is. Third, there is a lack of attractive Corpse Explosion legendary items. Particularly phylacteries, there is just nothing there for a corpse build of any kind. I usually just revert to a lidless wall. And that's that. And that about covers it for my complete impressions of the Grace of Inarius set. This video was shot live at twitch.tv/thedeadset where I showcase Necromancer builds and theory crafting live. I would like to take a moment to thank Icy Veins, the gracious host of my guides, as well as the people that subscribe to my Twitch channel for the month for supporting the content I create. Thank you from the bottom of my heart, and I will see you guys next time.